My name's James Robbins. I'm Product Development Manager at Shakespeare and also a member of the Shakespeare Super Team. I'm fishing today in Stratford Town Centre on the River Avon. It's a day ticket water and this stretch is really consistent for catching roach, perch and some decent chub as well. It's the autumn, so we're in a change time at the moment in terms of the fishing, and I think the best approach today is going to be to fish the Waggler. Now, Waggler fishing on a river is probably the simplest way of float fishing. The main reason for me to select a Waggler is when I want to fish further out than what I can fish a stick float, so more than 2 or 3 rod lengths, and also if there's not so much pace. If there's no pace, then it's very difficult to fish a stick float effectively. So with a Waggler, with a simple shotting pattern of the bulk around the float and a few shots spread down the line, I can fish at distances from 3 rod lengths right out to 5-6 rod lengths down the far bank. Also, another advantage is when the river's very low and clear like it is today. A Waggler is going to allow me to present the bait very effectively past the middle of the river where the fish are maybe shying away from any disturbance from the bank, and also it allows me to fish without spooking the fish. I think that pole fishing on a day like this would result in very few fish. So I've selected the Waggler and I just want to take you through a bit more detail relating to this fantastic method. So the rod I've selected today is the Mach 3 XT 13 foot. Now this is probably my favourite rod from the range because it's so versatile. Within the range we've got a 13 foot light, a 13 foot standard, which is this one, a 13 foot 6 power, a 14 foot and a 15 foot. But for a day such as this where I've not got too much wind, I'm not going to be fishing too far out, I'm going to select the 13 foot. I've coupled it up with the 035 Mach 3 XT reel. It's an open face reel, which I must say I prefer to fish with for 90% of the time nowadays when I'm fishing on the river. I will consider using a closed face reel such as the Avon 607 when I want to catch lots of small fish quickly and I'm casting in and out a lot. But when I want to Waggler fish on a day like this, it's an open face reel. Moving on to the Wagglers. Waggler fishing really is simple, and you can really classify the Wagglers into 2 groups: insert Wagglers and your straight Wagglers. Now obviously there's going to be various factors in selecting which float to use. I will use insert Wagglers on very calm flat days such as this, when I'm fishing up in the water, fishing with delicate baits like just a single maggot on fairly small hooks and light hook lengths, purely because the floats are more sensitive. But when these floats fall down is when I want to fish further out with a bigger capacity, or when I want to fish more positively in terms of the depth that I'm fishing and also the shots that I've got down the line. I would say that for most of my Waggler fishing on rivers, I do select a straight Waggler, and I'd go from anything from down to a 2AA version like that one, right up to a 5 or 6AA version like that. They're just simple, straight peacock Wagglers, not loaded. I prefer an unloaded float because on the cast, the float won't dive into the water. And I also use a quick change float adapter. This one's a Drennan one with a swivel. So I can change the floats during the day, either change the size or change the colour, dictating on the conditions that I'm faced. The main line that I'm using today is this 4-pound Berkeley XWR, which only has a diameter of 0.14. For my lighter fishing on stick floats and Wagglers, I love this line because it's so light, it's very buoyant, and there's a fair amount of stretch in it. But it means that I can balance the main line to a very delicate hook length, which today is an 0.8 version of the same line. So that gives me a breaking strain of 2 pounds and a diameter of 0.8. Because the conditions are so clear, I really think that I'm going to have to fish very fine to catch anything today. So I'm just going to start with 0.8. Now, if I was fishing a more powerful river such as the Wye or the Severn, catching bigger fish like chub and barbel, obviously I'd increase the main line and I'd go for an 0.16 or maybe an 0.18 in the same material. So I find now that I use the XWR line for the majority of my Waggler and stick fishing on rivers. The hook I'm using, again, I'm going to start off with a very delicate hook. This is a size 24 Drennan carbon match, and I'm just going to fish it with a single maggot. I'm going to loose feed very lightly and just feel my way into the session, just see what I can catch. So I'd now like to take you through some of the fundamentals relating to waggler fishing in terms of casting, presenting the bait, feeding and playing the fish. So first of all, I'm going to see if I can catch something. So the mechanics relating to the simple overhead cast are: I'll open the bail arm, trap the line against the spool with my finger, hold the line just above the hook. I'll just show you in slow motion. Sweep the rod back slowly, let go of the line and cast. So if I actually do a cast, you'll see. This cast means that you'll get very few tangles and also minimise disturbance with the float hitting the water very gently. Another trick that I've learnt and think's really key is the technique of being able to feed with a catapult whilst holding the rod. The obvious advantage is you save time by putting the rod down on a rod rest and picking the catapult up, but also you can strike and hit a bite if you get a bite while you're firing the bait out. One thing that you might have noticed is that when I cast, I do actually cast the waggler further the line so that the bait and float lands past where I'm fishing. This again minimises the disturbance of the impact of the cast of the float hitting the water on top of any feeding fish. So I'll actually cast past where I'm feeding, feed, and then pull the float back into the feed zone again. So here we go. Feed, and then pull the float back into the feed. So that achieves two things. It doesn't disturb the fish, and also I'm bringing my hook bait right into where the loose feed is. So when I've actually cast, the next thing to think about is controlling the float. Now on a day like this, it's really easy because there's no wind. So what I'm actually doing is I'm just casting slightly downstream so the line is automatically behind the float. The worst thing you want when you're float fishing is the line overtaking the float and pulling the float off course, because that'll mean that the bait's not behaving naturally and you won't catch much. So controlling the line whilst I'm trotting the float's really simple. Basically, you leave the bail arm open after the cast and trap the line with your finger, and as the float moves down the peg, then you release the line and control the float. When you get a bite, just trap the line, strike, knock the bail arm over gently and start to play the fish. One thing to mention, when you're fishing in such clear conditions with such fine gear, you don't want to be striking really wildly. You want to strike really gently, just lift into the fish and pull the fish away from the rest of the shoal. If you strike hard, then you're going to end up breaking the hook length or pulling out. Now, I mentioned that at the moment I'm casting slightly downstream. If it was a really windy day and the wind was downstream, I'd actually cast even further downstream to get more angle between the float and the rod. So I'd actually get the line behind the float and allow the float to go through as naturally as possible with the wind. On an upstream wind, you can actually do the opposite and fish more out in front of you because you're actually trying to get the float to move against the wind. But for sure, the hardest method when you're waggler fishing is if you've got a strong downstream wind. Now, I know this peg's around about 6 foot deep, and I'm fishing around about 5 or 6 foot deep now, just on the drop and seeing what I can catch. I'm getting a few bites off bleak, I think, at the moment. So if I keep catching these, I'll pull a few more of those extra shot that I've got around the float down the line and try and get the hook bait to the bottom quicker. So I'm sure there's some roach down there as well. That feels like a roach. Just picked him off halfway down the swim. It's not massive, but a nice weight builder. Around about 3 or 4 ounces. I've caught roach here up to 2 pounds in the winter. So it's got to be one of my favourite styles of fishing. Catching roach on a river on a hard day like this when the conditions are clear and we're starting to get cold conditions with frost. Beautiful fish. So there you go, 3 or 4 pounder roach, perch and a few bleak. I've really enjoyed waggler fishing today.